We're talking about data security and responsible use. And the reality is my data is not going to hackers anymore. It's going to companies.
That's the thing. This is the type of surveillance that this is enabling and collecting, right? Obviously, it makes people feel uncomfortable. It changes behavior patterns. It makes people self-conscious if they know it's happening. And that's part of the problem, right?
We spend a lot of time talking about school shootings and protecting physical safety. And the news likes to talk about this because, if it bleeds, it leads. So in Utah, we've had a lot of extreme focus on the school shooting aspects and physical security and all of these different things over the last few years. But there's been very little no focus on resources to protect students' data.
Welcome to the AMP to 11 podcast. For those of you who are wondering if you're at the right podcast, you are. You're probably used to hearing Brett introduce our latest episode. And unfortunately, Brett is not here with us today. And so you are going to be stuck with me and someone who I'm pretty sure is about to become my new best friend, because I have with me today a guest I've really been looking forward to. I have David Bowman, who leads the cybersecurity program for one of the largest school districts in Utah. So basically, he's personally responsible for defending over 100,000 devices, Chromebooks, servers, all the things from the ultimate chaos agents, thousands, almost 60,000 students, right, David? And 7,500 staff members. And we have invited David today to our podcast because we have so many interesting things to talk about, including but not limited to a recent breach that happened with Canvas, which is based very close to where I think you are, David. And then news coming out about Anthropic's Mythos, all of this cybersecurity type news that I think will be very interesting to dive into with someone who is an expert and talks about these types of risks all over the world. David serves on the State of Utah Cyber Commission, chairs the statewide IT Directors Council, and chairs the statewide K-12 Cybersecurity Council, which means he sits in a lot of meetings all day, every day, talking about things probably people don't want to hear. But before we kind of kick this off into what I think is going to be a fascinating discussion, I think we want to hear the story about how you and Brett met, because you told us before we started that you just went up and kind of gave him a hard time at a conference. And I love that for you. So tell us everything.
We have a pretty innovative conference that we have here in Utah that's it's called USET, but it's focused on education technology and teachers. And so we do that every year, and there's lots of different topics and professional development and training and all of those kinds of things. For many years, it's been a lot more traditionally focused to an educator focus. And one of the things that the conference has tried to do is to get a little more adding roles of folks in technical aspects to do sessions and talk about them and kind of consider those technical aspects of things behind it. Like, one of the main reasons I go is so I can walk around on the vendor floor and see what vendors are telling my teachers, like, hey, yeah, just tell your IT to flip on the roster button and then this will work great. So it's kind of my annual spy out what teachers are about to ask me for. Um, Plus, that's an opportunity for me to individually give stern lectures to each vendor about what the heck they're doing with data privacy, and could we maybe have a product that doesn't have the word AI in it? Like, so, I mean, that's the type of thing where I'll end up doing that. But in this case, the way I ran across Brett is we were in a session that was talking about what's the future of AI in education and the topics. And there happened to be a lot more technical people in the room than your traditional educator. And so Brett kind of went into some of the normal stuff he talks about and the things he's excited about. And then because I am who I am, right? People call it David style. I just said, you know what, Brett? I'm sure you've talked about this before. Could we talk about the fact that we're talking about data security and responsible use, and the reality is my data is not going to hackers anymore; it's going to companies, and I want to talk about that. And Brett was like, "Yeah, okay." And so we talked about it for a few minutes, and then At one point, he said something, and I just was like, "That's bullcrap. That's not true." And then he's like, "Okay, this is a whole separate podcast conversation that has to go on." And that's kind of how I ended up meeting Brett, by just giving him a hard time. So, yeah.
I love that, and, that wouldn't have been the first time that Brett heard that. I bring that up a lot on our podcast, and it's the very unsexy reality of ed tech that really bothers me. As someone who does research in the UK where the data privacy laws are much more intense, I think it just really bothers me. And I don't think as many people are aware as should be that a lot of these companies make money by taking millions of dollars from schools, but then make more money than again taking data and brokering it, or as they like to say, sharing it with partners. And I'm sure you're seeing that.
They're making more money off of our data than what they're making off of me to pay them for the service.
Isn't that
And,
insane?
like, that's the piece that ethically, it's like, I don't think people get it. Or, like, this is the problem in the classroom that we run into, is the teacher sees it as this great free tool.
Personalized learning.
Yeah, but if it's free, then, well, nothing's free. If it's free, you're the product. But the individual teacher in the classroom doesn't have to think at the level of, there is 60,000 students' data that I have to protect and be part of. They just see me as the, why did you say no to that cool AI robot? I just, and that's the reality of what we're dealing. So it's not just fighting the companies to behave the way they should. It's not just defining the data. It's being seen as the no department by our educators, which are the critical piece of why we're in business, right? I don't want to say no to things, but I have to teach the responsibility aspects. And that is increasingly so big and different to understand for teachers, that I'm the bad guy a lot. And that's kind of a bummer.
I feel like there's a misconception about like data and what it is. There's a whole like kind of thing happening with that. This generation, a younger generation that's like, yeah, take my data. I don't care. Take my data. I don't care if you know what I watch or what I do and things like that. And I just don't think people understand, number one, the value of data, what's being collected, why it's so valuable, and what the risks are of this data. It's just kind of a blanket term like AI data, right? It can mean so many different things, but why is it so valuable? What should people know about why that's valuable and why it needs to be safeguarded?
So, from a value perspective, the speech I get from vendors a lot right now is, we have to have this data in order to make the product work for you. So, we can't make the product better without recording every single thing you're doing. Utah is actually rather progressive in our student data privacy laws. Like, we have a dedicated office for it in the State Board of Education. So, when I've been at conferences or other things, then people are like, oh, that guy's from Utah, just be quiet. They know what they're talking about, right? Like, Utah has been a really great leader in what some of those things look like. But as part of those things that come up, is people just don't understand the crumbs that get put together. So you can easily go look me up on LinkedIn, and you can see everywhere I've ever worked. You can see what cities I've lived in. That information is totally out there. And yeah, that's fine. But when you make it more real, that's what helps people to understand a little bit better about what's going on. Probably one of the ones that scares me the most, or helps people attach to it. Rebecca, if I said I was going to send someone to just sit next to your desk and watch you use the internet for 8 hours, how would that make you feel?
That's the thing. This is the type of surveillance that this is enabling and collecting, right? Obviously, it makes people feel uncomfortable. It changes behavior patterns. It makes people self-conscious if if they know it's happening. And that's part of the problem, right?
Well, and it's not just that they get disconnected from what it is, but the piece that's really hard to understand is that sometimes you need that data in order to perform the required service. Like, no one's going to say, yes, please have somebody come stand next to me and watch me use the internet. But parents do want me to stop children from looking at stuff on the internet that they're not supposed to. So, in order to do that, I have a content filter tool that is on their device and literally watches every single website they go to all day long with everything that they do. I literally am watching every single thing they do and they do and say. But in order to provide content filtering, I don't have a choice to do that. But traditionally in the past, it would use a little bit of its own data, and program developers or product developers did have jobs before AI, so products could be developed without AI. So, but what happens now is instead of content filter provider taking our data for Jordan School District and saying, okay, this is where the errors are, or we report issues. They throw it into this big pool that everybody's in, and it's quote unquote anonymized. And then the argument is, well, if you want us to be able to content filter so kids can't look at pornography, then you have to let us do this. Well, you don't have to have all of my data and aggregate it in order to make your product better. Matter of fact, if you need that to make your product better, make a better product.
Mhm. And I think the part that most people aren't putting together is how this connects to AI and this AI era, right? Because all of this data, maybe our social media, maybe our LinkedIn, all of these things were available at before, right? In disconnected ways. But now we have these systems that can then put all those pieces back together and re-anonymize and collect all of these digital trace data that exist everywhere and use AI to help create pretty comprehensive pictures of individuals or systems or processes or how people think or interact. And that's worth a lot of money to organizations and companies uh, at all different level, which is why companies are collecting that data and then selling it to other companies, correct?
Yeah. And the argument I get into with providers, and this is a piece where I think people misunderstand. So, one thing to know is that most school districts and people that manage data, they have what's called a data privacy agreement with the vendor that says this is the data you're going to get. This is what you're allowed to do with the data or not do with the data. And if you're going to share it with third parties, this is how you can do it or can't do it. But we ran into an issue with a statewide provider actually that we were using for math curriculum that had some funding through the state. And we're watching network traffic. So we're getting onto the geeky IT side here. And we notice across many of the schools, because we all start talking to each other, that there's this new website called fullstory.ai, and all of a sudden we have a ton of network traffic going to that. And we're like, what what is this thing? And we go to the website, and if you read the website, it's all about track your customers and know everything where they do it, and da 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 da. And we're like, okay, this looks really sus, right? And so we start kind of looking into it. And it took us a little bit to narrow down exactly what application or thing was doing it, because it turns out four of them were doing. Um, but the biggest offender was this math program. And so we reach out to the technical side of the math program guys and go, hey, what are you doing? Your agreement doesn't say you can do that. Like, and they're like, well, it's anonymized and da 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 da. And I'm like, well, listen, I extracted a packet, and here's what I can see that you're doing. You're collecting who's logged in. You're collecting their device's IP address. So this is a way to extrapolate their location. You're collecting their grade. So now you know roughly how old they are. Then you're tracking things like a student got mad and rage clicked on a question, and you're tracking that. And then you're not only tracking them as data elements, but you literally have a recording of everything that was going on the screen. And I'm like, is that really what's happening? Because it's what I see. And they're like, well, no, we're not recording everything that's going on with the screen. And I said, okay, but I'm looking at a ticket here that one of my teachers submitted because a kid had an issue with a math test. And I see your agent responding saying, okay, who is the student? And, the teacher explains the student what time it is. And they said, okay, let us go look at the recording and we can figure out what the issue was. So then that became a challenge point with the CEO of saying, because they were based in Utah. So we were able to track them down and say, look, man, you're saying that it's anonymized and you can't tie it back to anybody. But the network traffic is not going to you, it's going to this full story AI company, and then it's going to you. So he's giving all this trumped up technical explanation about nobody can map the numbers back to each other and it's appropriately identified. And then a couple of the districts just said, hey, look, man, we're just going to block fullstory.ai and we're not going to let any traffic go there. And he's like, if you do that, it will break my software and it won't work. So it was kind of like a threat game of, I can't, it won't work if you block that. Well, guess what? We blocked it. And guess what? It still works. And they're still developing the program. They're just not getting that extra AI data. And that extra AI data and full recordings, that's a win in aspects of somebody that was paying really close attention, noticed it, caught it, called the vendor out on the mat, and made it stop. But that became a big enough example and conversation happening in the state that in the last legislative session we had in the spring, they passed a new state law that says if we identify a vendor doing something with data that's inappropriate, they get notification and they have 30 days to fix it, or their contract is automatically null and void and we're not legally allowed to use them anymore. So it's an extremely powerful statute that somebody's going to have to test and push it against. And it'll probably be me at some point. But I mean, we at least have legislative level paying attention and going, this is a scary problem. And the problem is now vendors are like, well, we're not going to agree to that. And so then we get into the situation of we're trying to push it, we're trying to establish these things, but there becomes this moment in time in the contractual negotiation or the data privacy agreement where they say, listen, we can't agree to that, or our attorneys won't let us agree to that. And we have to be bold enough as a school district to say, okay, then we won't buy your software. But, and a perfect example of how that becomes an issue, and that can even transition us to a conversation about the Canvas breach and what happened with that, is Canvas was one of the other providers that was sending traffic off to Full Story AI.
And let's stop here and give people context on what Canvas is, because this is a perfect example of what happens. Maybe you have an agreement with one company, maybe it's acquired by another company and you don't know where that data flows, or maybe you're locked into some sort of ecosystem with your data for so long at such a scale that you don't necessarily even have any choice about switching, even if the data practices aren't great. So let's talk a little bit about that, David. I'm sure you have opinions.
Yeah. So when it's a small application, like we could say, hey, look, we're not using this math application, then that's a little easier. But other ones that we found that were offending sending off to these AI programs were big providers like Adobe or Canvas, which is our online, like this is where the syllabus are, the assignments, the grading, the papers, all the content that the students need, attendance. Like there's not traditional teachers take home papers to grade anymore or print out handouts. It's all in the system. Now, to Canvas's benefit and credit, we said, yo, we don't like that. And they said, oh, okay, cool. We'll turn it off. And so that was an appropriate response from a vendor. Now, one could argue that their contractual agreement should have required them to give us notice that they were going to change to do that. And it didn't happen. But one of the things is you find vendors that are more responsible, and those are the ones that you want to work with. So, for example, we told Canvas, we don't like this, and we really think you should have given us notice. And they said, no problem, we'll turn it off. And then about 60 days later, they came back to us and said, hey, we've reviewed this internally, and we would like to update our agreements to talk about this to make it more usable for everybody. And so that was a really cool, responsible behavior.
Is the reason they want to use it, are they making money off of tracking that data? Is that the reason they want to use it? Or are they using it to improve internal AI systems? What's in it for them that they came back and they were like, hey, like, we really actually want to do this? How does that benefit them? What are they getting out of it?
This would be one of those things where it's hard to prove in a court of law. And then that's why people look at people like you and I are like, where's the tinfoil hat, right? Is it blurred in the background there? So the way this works, and so there are people like data brokers that literally take information and it's literally you go to their website and you buy it. So, I mean, that is a thing. But the way it works with the big ed tech vendor like that is what'll happen is, yeah, they're going to use some of it for exactly what they said they're going to use it for. But then they'll have a relationship with an advertising agency or a marketing company or a data processing company where they say, hey, we'll give you a really good discount if we can use your data. So they kind of get services in exchange, and that exchange becomes so great where it's almost like they end up getting some of those things for free. And I my tinfoil hat says it's out there somewhere, but in reality is there's probably not a place where provider A says, okay, I have the student data and it's for sale and you write me a check for X amount.
I know that there was a class action lawsuit brought against Canvas in the last couple of years, alleging that they shared their student data with over 500 partners, which I thought was very, very interesting. Parents were upset to learn about that, and you know, fair. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. It sounds like even kind of with us about like why and what are you using it for, which isn't great considering kids can't consent to how their data is used, and there's a lot of issues around that as well. So it's just interesting to point out that if you're sharing it with allegedly 500 partners and we don't quite know why or how that data is being used, that's a whole other thing to be talking about. But let's continue down the Canvas rabbit hole and tell us a little bit, lead us in here. You had that agreement, they came back. And I don't know how long ago that was, but I'm wondering if what's happened over the last few months has changed some of those conversations you've been having with Canvas.
That was over a year ago. It kind of is what it is because they gave us the option to say we just don't want it that way. And that was fine. Making them give it to us in writing and get it approval, what kind of like we changed it from the standard of, well, you have to notify us and then you're fine. So we were able to push to change the standard of you have to notify us and then we have to respond back and say it's okay. So not just de facto we have permission. And vendors really don't like that, but Canvas did a good job with that. And they said, okay. And so now it's so much work for them to do it. They probably just do it with other districts or other people that aren't as hawkish about their data. So, one of the, because for me, as much as we talk about the challenges, I'm a big believer and it's super important that we also offer solutions and what we can do. So, this recent Canvas breach is a really good example of where good behavior and not so great behavior was happening. And so it changed how it impacted different institutions.
Why don't
So
you tell the whole story for anyone who hasn't been following this in the news or they just clocked it off to something they didn't understand? Spin the tale. Tell us the story and what happened and give us the background.
so Canvas has a lot of data. In order for us to use Canvas as a school district, I can't think of any other vendor except Google that runs our actual ecosystem that has that level of data. And frankly, Google doesn't even have that level of data. Like Canvas is one of my core data shares because a big example is it knows information about students' grades because teachers graded in Canvas and then it automatically goes back to our student information system. So it knows every class that every kid's in. It knows the grades, what assignments are completed. They have to know all of those things in order to make the product work the way we want it to work. So when systems and bigger computer systems talk to each other, they have a technical tool it's called an automated programming interface or an API. Basically that just means, hey, Canvas's system speaks this very specific language that is Canvas's language and my system speaks a very specific language that's my system's language. And there's an agreed interface of this is how we will talk to each other. So when that conversation happens, there's ongoing syncing. Sometimes that's daily, hourly, sometimes it's every time. It just depends what it looks like. So it's natural that a vendor has that type of thing and it's automated. And this automation becomes very important in kind of understanding the timeline of where things became interesting. But on the 26th of April, their main data communication language setup went down for maintenance. So if you went to their outage page, it just said, hey, we know there's an issue. We're working on it. We now know that that's actually when they started to figure out that there was some hacking groups into their system. And so then on the 27th, they indicated, yeah, it's an ongoing outage still. We do know based on some of the after action stuff that they absolutely knew it was a cyber attack going on at that point. But then they make it to the 29th, which is a Friday, and they wait until Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon and send an email to the customers and say, "Hey, we're aware of a security incident. We're working on it, and it probably contains a few things: first name, last name, email address, course enrollment, direct message data. So if a student talks to a teacher and a private message, that was included. And it was like, well, wait a second, we need way more info than this. What happened? Are the bad guys gone? And this will be a case study for a very long time to come of how not to do public relations.
And I'm gonna pause you there because I ran school public relations for a long time. And just to point out the timing on this, April 29th, it's not just K-12s that use this, right? There's tons of universities and colleges that suddenly kids couldn't submit work before deadlines. The
They couldn't
university
submit final exams.
exactly. They couldn't communicate with professors. This has all been centralized to such a place that this was paralyzing for many institutions, and nobody knew what was going on, and they had no way to get information. Because as you mentioned, the doors were locked and the phones were turned off, and this was all the message you had to go on.
And not only that, but the group that attacked them, and so we went the weekend with no information from Canvas at all. They finally released a generic statement on their website on Saturday that was a repeat of the same nothing burger. But the particular group that attacked them is called Shiny Hunters. So they are a really big data stealing criminal gang, and they're very sophisticated. But what's really quite interesting is they have an extremely effective PR team. So Shiny Hunters starts posting all over the internet and the dark web and everything about, hey, we have this data and we've attempted to engage with Canvas and they aren't talking to us. And, sometimes you have to take what the bad guys have to say with a grain of salt. But then Monday comes around and we're still not seeing any good communication from Canvas. And the attackers, these shiny hunter guys, take this bold step of saying, you know what? Canvas is not responding to us. We can tell that people are frustrated as customers. So here's the deal. Here's a website you can go to, and it's a list of every institution's data that we have. And you would be welcome to contact us and individually negotiate protecting your institution's data. And so this is kind of a unique and interesting case study because typically when you hack a company, you you're dealing with that company. The scope is all of those customers but that company. But the relationship with Canvas and the individual decision makers and boards and all of these different ongoing management things made it so that it was potentially feasible to negotiate individually with the terrorists or the cyber terrorists. And we know that that happened. I think it was, don't overquote me, I'd have to double check the news, but I think it was a university in Pennsylvania where their student newspaper actually wrote an article saying that the administration had told them they'd reached an arrangement with the attackers so their data wasn't going to be released. And so that theoretically at some point was successful, but what got even more crazy is, and this is the funny part about the timeline. So I have a little, and I'll have to get you the asset so you can throw it up on the podcast. But I have a little sign in my office now that's called Canvo de Mayo. And the shiny hunters and all of this silly, because at this point it's been going 4 or 5 days. Those of us who are really worried about it aren't sleeping real great. And, at some point you have to dink around with your AI to entertain yourself.
And let me pause you there. What worries you? What's the worst case scenario here that could happen that is making you lose sleep?
So that's the funny part. A lot of people don't think it's that big of a deal.
Sure.
My
So a
first
listener
name,
might not.
last
Yeah.
name, email address, not that big of a deal. And actually, I really tried to sample this and track this because I'm an adjunct professor at night. So I teach adults, and this was going on, and I teach cybersecurity and cloud systems. And so this was a very relevant first week of class. And I just said, hey guys, do you care if your first name and last name is out there and your email address? And they're like, well, no, not really. Like you mentioned, a lot of the adults do. Well, then as we talked more and more through the details, I said, well, let me connect those dots. So here's the trick here of what the risk is the relational connections versus just the, yeah, my name and email is out there. It's not a big deal. And when we talk about the AI aspect, the computing power of the ability to stick all those things together really easily is what's fundamentally changed from that. So it used to be like you could go to the big research university in your region and say, we want to use your supercomputer to do this data analysis and help us figure out these things. Now you just go to ChatGPT or Gemini and say, here's my data, do that. So you don't have to go to, you don't have to write a proposal and go use the university's supercomputer anymore. You just do it from the internet.
Because AI excels at making connections and finding patterns and connecting dots, all the dots that might be there, right?
And so it's not going to replace me. It's going to change how I work. But here's a scenario where things get, and this is a little geeky, but I want to give this example of how you connect it together. So let's say I have an eighth grader that's in middle school. So what age is that? 14 ish? 14. Yeah. So with their first name and last name, I probably could easily infer this is what their gender is. I could infer their ethnicity. So Canvas collected that data if people pushed it. So if you told them what the student's gender and ethnicity was, then then it's there. Some people were sharing that, some people were not. But then, age. Well, you can also see here's all the classes that people were signed up for. So when this 15-year-old student is signed up for special education services class, now I know this student has some type of disability. This is their ethnicity. This is their age. And this is the time of day that they interact with the systems and their courses. So if I'm motivated and want to figure that stuff out, I know who the kid is I can target based on his ethnicity. I know this kid is potentially more susceptible to persuasion or hacking because they maybe have some type of developmental delay or some special education services needs. And then you could also, when students log into Canvas, there's a little picture of them. It helps the teacher identify who they are. Well, now I can print out for you, if I were to go print out all the screens I have, your first name, last name, picture, email address, gender, special education status, ethnicity, sometimes parents' first name and last name, your geography, and roughly a zip code because of your school, and what type of student you are. Well, now, okay, maybe I care. Now that like if you printed it out as a dossier like a hitman, right? Of this is I'm going to go hack this person, that's a lot more disturbing. And so I actually did an interesting exercise with my college class, and they've been like, "Yeah, we don't we don't care that much." And so I took and I made a mock one of just the pieces of data that I knew we were giving Canvas. And luckily, we were giving Canvas the absolute bare minimum. So a lot of this stuff wasn't involved, at least at our institution, in terms of the amount of things that could have been there. And I printed it out like a dossier and I handed it out to the class and said, "All right, guys, do you have different feelings now about this?" And then universally, it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I I all of a sudden care now, and I care a lot.
Well, and if you think about it, that kid's 17, doesn't know this data's out there, whatever. How easy is it to then start applying for credit cards or do identity theft that the kid doesn't recognize until they go eventually to do those things for themselves? And at scale, how many times does that happen to how many kids? And what kind of impact does that have for them down the road? Like in the hands of which bad actors is that data the most useful and damaging for kids in the future, in your opinion?
So, listen, credit card numbers and setting up identity theft, stuff like that. Yeah, it's absolutely happening. It's a financial motivator. Something I try to share with people that's kind of interesting that they don't realize. So, if you go on the dark web to buy data for purposes of like identity theft or things like that, an adult is worth maybe a dollar or two, right? A student or a minor is worth like $10 because it's less monitored, because it's somebody who maybe isn't as sophisticated to know what it looks like. Well, now take that $10 and times it by my 57,000 students. So now, if you were to hack my school district just for purposes of that data, that's at least $500,000 easily resellable value. But here's the crazy part. Or I'm a marketing company that wants to develop an EdTech software, and I want to understand more about how students use things and do it. So I go to a data broker and I pay them $10,000 for that information on 57,000 students. So as a good guy, it's actually cheaper. Now, you don't get exactly the same first name, last name, birth date, but you get the same aggregated data. And so people kind of brush it off and go, listen, it's just credit. It's just a little bit of money. Their identity gets stolen. That's not the part that really scares me. The part that scares me here is actually, I was on a webinar the other day where they were talking about it. So trying to hire people effectively and go through things is complex, but there's a lot of data out there. And so one of the services this product offers is give us the name of your candidate and we will just tell you everything we know about them. And that was part of the service. And so when you do it that way, then now this student's applying to a job and they look at the student, they like them, they decide to run that background check or that deeper dive. And then they can see, oh, this is where that kid lived. This is how old they are. This is what their grades were like. This is what types of classes they took. Well, these are all things that are illegal to discriminate based on, but we're giving them that information easily so that conscious or unconscious bias wise, that's what happens. But I do the same thing as a technology professional that hires people, especially in the IT space. When I narrow it down to the two or three people I'm most interested in, I start Googling them. I'm looking at their social media. I'm looking at if they're on gamer forums. I'm looking at all those kinds of things. And I had experienced recently where I had a candidate that I really liked and thought that candidate would be a good candidate. And then I came across a social media profile where all the person did was complain and moan about their work all day. And it was like, maybe that's not such a great fit. But those are, and this is going to be, call this controversial, but we spend a lot of time talking about school shootings and protecting physical safety. And the news likes to talk about this because, if it bleeds, it leads. So in Utah, we've had a lot of extreme focus on the school shooting aspects and physical security and all of these different things over the last few years. But there's been very to little no focus on resources to protect students' data. Here's the reality: if a kid gets injured or shot or they're in a school, they go to the hospital, they get treatment, it changes their life for sure, but it becomes an event that they can move on from. If their data and all their identity gets stolen, it haunts them forever. It haunts them in jobs. It haunts them in ability to get credit. It haunts them and how they're targeted politically. And so instead of it being a limited window event, it's an ongoing life event. And that's why I get a little bent out of shape when people are like, but the word that I really like to use is stewardship. You have to be a steward of people's data and treat it like it was your own and you would care.
That's exactly it, and that's what I love about your level of care and awareness here, because I don't think we're seeing that everywhere. To go back to Canvas for a minute, Shiny Hunters gave Canvas a deadline, and from what I understand, they eventually paid up or came to some sort of agreement. What do you know about that?
So the interesting part about this is nobody really was noticing this was going on until May 4th or May 5th. And the reason that this happened was because Shiny Hunters was still in the system, unbeknownst to Canvas, and they had told everybody it was good. And then in the afternoon one day, all of a sudden, about 900 Canvas customers, the screen popped up with a message that all anybody logged into it said, "Hey, we're Shiny Hunters. Canvas patched, and they thought they had us out, but we still have control. So we're the boss. We're not gone yet. You need to pay us." Right. So at that point, speculation slash things are heard slash how you interpret things are said. Canvas had not engaged with them and had zero intention to engage with them. But the Shiny Hunters PR people figured out that we really care. And so it's not like we weren't all like yelling at Canvas, like, what the heck are you doing? But now media, institutions, everybody is banging on Canvas's door saying, guys, like, you have to talk to us about what's going on. We weren't demanding they paid. We were just saying, you got to talk to us about what's going on. Well, there were some deadlines and then they would move it out. And that's somewhat natural attacker behavior. If they think with a little bit more time, they might get some money. They'll have a tendency to play that game. So we get into the weekend of that week, and all of a sudden everybody's paying attention now. Because when people, normal users saw that on the screen, people were taking pictures, and now the entire news is picking it up. Federal levels are, they all of a sudden everybody knows about the thing that I've been losing sleep over for a week, right? And that was a moment where that was kind of an oh crap moment because, all right, they are still in there. So we really can't trust them anymore. So the gut reaction from a large number of vendors and school districts was we talked about that special communication tool that's automatic. We just cut it off. We just said, we're done. And so, the big interruption for that is, teachers, if they were putting in grades and things, and determining graduation eligibility, those were not going back to the system that's the source of truth to decide those things. And when major vendors started doing it, their services were essentially inaccessible because it was accessed through Canvas. We turned it off out of I'm really tired of abundance of caution, right? Like we did it because we don't trust those freakers, right? Like, but you did PR, right? Abundance of caution is everybody's favorite word. I think I had a LinkedIn post going for a while of like, give me an alternative to abundance of caution, and I think my favorite one was out of a total lack of faith that people will not click the link, we're going to da da da. Well, there's this technology principle that's called DDoSing or distributed denial of service. What that means is everybody, if you imagine like a grocery store and there's a hurricane coming or whatever, everybody goes to the grocery store and it's just completely overwhelmed and all of those things. Well, that can happen on the technology side of the house where everybody's sending an email to something or everybody going to a website and it just breaks. Well, here's the crazy part about what happens on the Friday, on the Friday in the afternoon, the Shiny Hunters guys take down from their website any mention of anything about Canvas or Instructure or the data or anything. And actually, give me just a second. I'm going to find the actual screenshot because I want to read it because it was just so hilariously written and so real about what it was like. I can't even word it. Okay. So this is what it said. Due to the significant amount of press inquiries we are receiving every hour from all around the world, we are making a public statement. We are not commenting and have no further comment to make regarding this global incident. Yes, Shiny Hunters posted that. So Shiny Hunters essentially got DDoSed through their own attempt of every media outlet, every customer, everybody, where they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. We're not commenting on this. Like they broke their own infrastructure to respond to things. That's one theory about it. Now, we do know, and so speculation then happens on the Friday. Okay, somebody paid, right? Canvas paid and Canvas did on the Monday or the Tuesday. So that was like 7th, 8th, 9th, we're around the 10th now. Canvas said, hey, we've reached an arrangement with the attacker and yada, blah, blah. Well, it's like, so did you pay the ransom? And they're like, we reached an arrangement. And I'm like, what lawyer is sitting there telling you not to say we paid the ransom? We all know that's what you did. But then it's like, okay, can we trust that? What happens with that data? Where did it go? And the answer is no, you can't trust it. You just, now, whether or not to pay them is a whole separate conversation, but you still have to behave and act on what you're going to do with it. At that point, clearly, Canvas hired an actual PR firm. We got an email from the CEO of Canvas apologizing for the disruption, and he felt really bad. So the good news is we're sorry that mass data shooting occurred. Our bad. Sorry. Right? I need to find the right word to describe that because we talk about mass school shooting, but we should find a relational term to the exfiltration of data. I got to think on that more.
And you think about, you take the other side for a second, what that must have been like for Canvas too. What a gong show, right? I'm torn because part of me looks at what happened with Power School. So like something's happened before. Like you own like a storage locker where you store people's stuff. And you know what? Somebody broke in recently to your neighbors and it was a massive nightmare. And so you kind of already know maybe like this could happen to you. What are you going to do to protect it? And then be shocked when something similar happens to you. I have a hard time not blaming them, but I also understand uh, groups hackers are good and, it probably sent them into a tailspin and what could they have done differently or better? Could they have? And with the technology that's coming out now, is this going to be an everybody problem soon? I have so many questions.
So let's talk about how you fix this and talk about the reality of why it goes this way. Security investments and security tools and how you take care of those things are expensive, right? I have that same issue in a school district. Should I buy this other security tool that will help us protect us, or should I pay two teachers? What is the core mission of what we're supposed to do in a school district? So that's a day to day reality. Here's the problem: when this type of thing happens to companies, they don't care. The penalty isn't big enough. It's not a big enough deal. Like could, Canvas is almost in too big to fail territory just because of the size of their customers and how you don't just wake up one day and go, hey, we're going to move to this competitor. And you don't do it in a summer. Right? I mean, this would have been the moment to go, hey, you know what? We're leaving. We're getting off of it. And it's just not something you can do that easily. So in the end, at some point, Canvas will probably pay some fines. They will pay, they'll maybe lose 10 to 15% of customers that are like, hey, we're not doing this anymore. Canvas, learn their lesson. So they'll actually, I mean, they've released guidelines about this is what we're doing to prevent this in the future, which is basically the lowest level tier one security responsibilities that everybody should have been doing in the first place. And so it's like, but that it didn't hurt. So like this happens with like a Google or an Apple or they're getting their or Power School, they're getting fined or the consequences are single digit single digit impacts to their revenue or their bottom line. Here's how you fix it. You make it hurt. If screwing that up makes it expensive enough that your entire company could go down, that boardroom level conversation about this is what's going to happen if this happens, yeah, we're not going to hire those two teachers because we can hire no teachers if that happens. Um, Europe is way out in front on this. They are getting stronger and stronger about it. The problem is that even in the consequences there, they're mainly the baseline statutes are number based, like X amount of dollars per instance or occurrence, which works for the small, the medium. But then you see a judgment that says Google got fined $1 billion. $1 billion to Google is the equivalent of me stopping at my dirty soda shop on the way home, right? To my annual budget, right? It's nothing. It's smarter from a business spreadsheet perspective to not make the investment. It doesn't matter. And so, one way to do things is to change it so that there is a percentage based penalty of profits for those types of violations. Because when breaking the rules or stretching the rules costs more money than it does to do the right thing, then they'll do the right thing.
And you are right into my territory now because this is such a big conversation happening with the big AI companies right now and accountability. And the fact that there's very little legislation governing any of that. And sorry, our chatbot told your kid this. but like there's no consequences or penalty or accountability at this point, and these companies are massive. And what does a good punishment or penalty look like when there isn't even any laws that are fast enough to keep up with all of this? These companies, the size of them is staggering and introducing a whole new layer of risk. And as we've mentioned, on that thread, Anthropic announced last month that they had built this AI system that scared them. And again, from a public relations standpoint, I understand maybe some of the motivations behind them releasing that. They essentially said,
No,
"Hey,
best marketing ploy ever.
ever." Okay, okay, yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I've
It's
heard
so
that.
good, it
So
scares
good, we
us.
can't tell you anymore, but it's so
Yeah.
amazing, right? But they came out and said, "We're worried that this is gonna hack every system in the world." Right? And so we're only gonna give it to the major companies so that they can use it to figure out where their systems are vulnerable and make those patches before this gets released. So yes, great marketing. Probably a little bit true, maybe when you think about the amount of public infrastructure in North America that is still operating on like Windows 7. Some of it, some major organizations, especially government organizations, infrastructure, even based on some whistleblower reports I've seen that are still operating on very old, easy to hack software. And we start to wonder if these data breaches become more common or we see them more often. And how are we ever supposed to protect ourselves or our children from this? Or is it just hype? David, what's your read?
My initial read was this either is what they say it is, and the world's over, right? Right? Pick your religious statute, right? Or preference, but God's coming back. It's over, right? Or it's the most brilliant marketing scheme ever. So that's been my concept for a little while. Now, I am connected enough to the security researcher environment and some of those things that I've been able to talk to people directly that have actually touched the mythos stuff or seen what it can do. And it part of why it can be successful is back to that DDoS concept of just trying the same thing over and over and over and over again until it finally breaks. And so because it's better at automating that than typically you write a program that says, try this thing and go try this thing on everything we know about. That's traditionally what it looked like. Now, what you're telling AI is try this thing, but if this, or this happens, then shift to this. And it really can find stuff that shouldn't be there, but it's not really inventing new ways to do things. So, like, this is a perfect example of how it works. So, yesterday, I was dealing with an issue where we got a video sent to us from a parent that said, "Hey, our kid is looking at pornography on your Chromebook. You need to make it stop." And I'm like, "Okay, well, anytime this happens, we try to figure out what's going on and we stop it." Well, parent shows us the video and it's like student goes to this approved app, then scrolls down to the bottom of the page, hits contact us, then goes up to the other top of that page and hits about this company, then goes to the bottom that says, here's your stock ticker for this company, that clicks take me to Google Stocks, and boom, now they're on Google search engine with no content filtering restriction. Right. So only a middle schooler's brain is bored enough to figure out the 7 clicks it takes to figure out how to get there. No human being, even a properly trained cybersecurity person or somebody locked in a basement by their government hacking other people, has the patience for that. Well, what does have the patience for that is a computer. And so, what I think will happen is that Anthropic or Mythos or whatever you want to call it will continue to find things and it's going to be a big deal and we need to patch it, but it's not going to change it's not going to change inventing this new way to hack people. It's just going to make the volume so large that we can't do anything about it. And so it's like, every time that we have to fix something, we have to turn a system on or an off or whatever. Let's imagine a perfect world where the vendor finds out about it and that same day I have a fix. Well, do I reboot it in the middle of the day and take everything down in the middle of class? Or do I wait until 6 o'clock? Because then teaching is done. Well, the basketball game is going on, or the adult ed night school is going on. So then do I do it at 10 o'clock at night? We're public government employees. Nobody wants to work at 10 o'clock at night. So do I have a guy that his job is to just turn everything on and off every night and apply fixes? That's the piece that's really going to get into the issue where that's going to be the piece that's really going to change things. And I'm not necessarily looking forward to being the incident response level person in that. I want to do the more leadership of how we fix it level at this point. I used to kind of want to be the guy that just sat in the basement by myself with my dark hoodie and my just, but now I'm like, oh, that's exhausting.
So then how do we fix it? Where do we go from here? Knowing, the parent who's listening to this or, y- you know, people who are freaked out about their data or what's possible, or like me, tempted to just move back to the farm and get some bees and turn off all my technology sometimes, how do we exist in this world? Is it just as easy as the digital hygiene, digital footprints individually? It doesn't sound like it, because it sounds like it is bigger than a lot of us and we're on the companies. Is the accountability piece the secret potion that we all need to exist here?
Yeah, don't click on phishing emails, be overly aware, blah, blah, blah. Why do we have to put that on every breach notification? If you don't know at this point to think before you click, it doesn't matter how many more ways I'm going to say it.
It's the same reason we put "don't drink the shampoo" on the shampoo bottle, right? Like, there's always
Yeah, or the coffee is hot at the McDonald's, whatever, right? Like, so, but you have, in the end, it has to be about accountability. You have to demand accountability as a parent, as a data steward, as a citizen, as a legislator, as a voter. Like, you have to make people pay and you have to demand accountability. And until everybody forces them to do it, they'll just keep doing it. And I don't want to say like you just kind of have to be resigned to it. A lot of those typical things that we talk about in the abundance of caution, doing those things will help you minimize your own exposure. And so it's good to do those things. But everything has a trade-off and people decide how they want to make it work. A perfect example, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I have all kinds of access to things that would be highly valuable. So, like David Bowman's credit is not particularly attractive. The username and password that David Bowman has that could access the data of that many people is extremely attractive, which makes me a very highly targeted individual. So, common sense would be David Bowman should not have a LinkedIn profile that literally says all these different things about me, where I've worked, to make it easy to associate that. I know that, but here's where the trade off comes. Because of where my experience sits, lots of companies want to research how to sell to people like me. So once or twice a year, I'll get a company that reaches out to me or a market research firm that says, hey, based on what we're seeing on your LinkedIn, if you'd be willing to talk to our client for an hour about this particular type of thing, we'll pay you $300 or $400. And it's like, okay, right? I mean, I'm doing this because I like to talk about it. Somebody wants to pay me by the minute to talk, I'm in. So I go through this period of like, I have to be more controlly and what I update my whole LinkedIn profile to be way more generic, way less easy to do it. And those opportunities dry up. And I'm like, well, I kind of like that. And so I put it back. So, it was a particularly interesting research time, but like during the year that I did that, I got almost $2,000 in those little conversations with zero effort. They just called me and offered to pay. So I'm choosing to give up my privacy for $2,000. So I'm making that decision, and everybody has to realize that they're making that decision. Now, I refuse to use Facebook or X or like the ones I think that are the most egregious. I I vote with it used to be vote with your dollar. Now I would say it's vote with your data, right? What data you will or will not share. And that's a decision and things that I have to do about that. And everybody is doing that. But I think the accountability is the biggest way to fix it, whether it's parents or class action lawsuits or fines of what's going on. And you got to hold them accountable. Like with this Canvas thing where they weren't communicating, the Senate Education Committee had sent a letter and said, you need to come talk to us about this. This impacts like a large portion of every student in the United States. And Canvas didn't answer the door or the phone call or the email. So then Senate Education Committee did the same thing that the bad guys did. They went to the media and said, hey, we sent you a message. We're trying to reach you about your extended car warranty, but you aren't answering. So here's the message that we sent you, and here's the date we expect you to come testify. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens when they come testify. But what's the impact in the end? There was a really big hack where that happened a lot with a company called Change Healthcare, and they controlled prescriptions for like 75% of America. And you can go watch those hearings and those things. And the funny part is to watch the legislators go, you didn't have 2FA turned on? Are you kidding me? Well, guess what? When it's all said and done, how much did that cost Change Healthcare?
It's like having your
Go look it up.
password for everyone set as password
Yeah,
123.
I mean, their stock hasn't gone down. They still have sufficient revenue. Like, it didn't hurt enough. Now, when I say you have to make it hurt, well, that's an interesting target. What happens when I get hacked? Because I'm going to get hacked as the school district. So, do you sue your school district? Is that fair? I was doing my best. Right? It was a well-meaning teacher who posted the spreadsheet of every student and all their data on the internet on accident. They're not a bad person. So who do you hold accountable for it? And how complicated is it to do that? It gets very complicated. Like, and this is something I can comment on because it's very public that Jordan School District is doing it. But there's serious concerns about the impact of social media and mental health on children. And it's really hard for individuals like, a mom would have a really hard time suing Facebook because of stuff that happened on Facebook that caused their child to kill themselves, as an example. Well, when an institution gets behind it, then it's bigger numbers. So Jordan School District, this random school district in Utah, is suing Facebook and Instagram and Meta and all these big companies, and we are what they call a bellwether case. So what happens with a class action is they build all of these different people, but then they take a few of the biggest ones that have the best stories and the best data, and they use them to present that. Well, our school district is proactively trying to hold people accountable for what they do. And people are like, well, what does that have to do with the school district? Like, how did that impact you? Well, we now have, which is actually super cool, investment and proactive good thinking on our board's part, but we have a mental health professional in every single school. We have 65 schools. The payroll cost to have 65 qualified professionals that are properly licensed in every single school, and there's way more than just one per school when you get to bigger schools, that's a significant cost to the taxpayer. And this concept of we hold people accountable is something that we believe in as a district and we believe in as a community. But I believe the same thing. That's why I'll go to a conference, or I'm willing to go on a podcast and say, Canvas, you didn't do it right. Because we believe institutionally, and David believes institutionally, that you have to demand accountability. And if you're not going to own it, I'm going to bug you until you own it. Now, I'm not going to go crazy on YouTube like the guy trying to fix the Lego problem that got stolen with the. If you want to rat, go watch the bricks and minifigs Lego theft. It's fascinating, right? I'm not going to be a crazy YouTube personality like doing all kinds of insane stuff, but I'm going to continue to demand that we get attention. And do I think that's gonna work or fix it? No. Do I think hopefully it helps and make some difference? Yeah, I really do. And I do have some belief that it will make some difference. But the influence I have, I will vote with my dollar, but not just my dollar, but with the taxpayer dollar budget that I control. When I deal with a content filter company, if they're going to feed the stuff to AI and not do it the way I want, then we're going to say we're not going to give you our taxpayer money. That's what you have to do. And so, there's going to be a corporate guy out here somewhere listening to this going, well, I believe the same way. I'm ethical and I'm responsible. How do I convince you or get to you to let you know that that's the way that I am? And that's why I'm different. And this is what I tell vendors and CEOs or different people that I come across. I said, on your website, I don't want to have to look for it. I want to easily go on your website and there's a button and you need to call it our digital data pledge. And on there, you should define every imaginable thing under the sun you can think of to explain what you're doing with the data, how you're going to use it, what you insist your customers do, what your security is. Give yourself a public report card. And then once a year, pay a professional firm to come in and test that everything you say you're doing is actually happening and be willing to put that on the internet and prove it. Because everybody sends me a thing with a bunch of stamps. We're approved by this thing. We're approved by that thing. But if somebody sends me, this is our data security manifesto, I, and we've even done this, I've researched it, and at least in Utah, this is appropriate in public purchasing policy. But when we define elements of what's evaluated for purchasing, there's a lot of rules about you can evaluate references and features and cost. We've added into our template of there's an evaluative score based on privacy practices. So then if one vendor might not be as good or is a little more expensive, but has this is our digital data manifesto and the other one doesn't, I can appropriately, and I believe ethically, that's what I should be doing, award something to a vendor because they're more aggressive about that. But how do you get your local school district or your local person to care about that? There's not a David at every school district. There's not a school board that's willing to go to bat and sue some of the world's largest companies, right? So it becomes that individual activism of the choices that you make about what you do. Be that crazy mom or that I, I have a tendency to call myself a cybersecurity evangelist, right? Or a technology evangelist. Don't overtake everything and replace it with technology. But you also have to be intentional. It was actually really interesting. Yesterday, there was a Senate hearing where they were interviewing some people about being worried about AI in higher education. And my experience is kind of cool because I get to live across both worlds. And like I've actually been developing this semester. My students use AI to do my one of my assignments. A lot of them they can't because I know how to design it properly. But I want to use it as a benefit to help them. So I made an AI chatbot that runs on my computer so it doesn't go anywhere. It just has a little website on it I've told it, this is my rubric, this is the assignment prompts, and the students can go take their writing assignment, put it in there, and say, give me feedback in the same way that Mr. Bowman would give me feedback to help me improve it. The students think it's super cool. I think it's super cool because they learn how to make their assignment better. I can tell the AI don't do the homework for them. And then I have it all locally on my thing so the data doesn't go anywhere. I would not be comfortable doing that with any large AI provider because I don't know what they're going to do with it. But there was this really cool conversation going on yesterday in the Senate hearing, and the guy's name is Michael Horn. So he's an author, but he's an adjunct professor at Harvard Graduate School. And he said this really interesting thing during that testimony that to me has been my mantra for almost 2 years now. And he said, if AI can complete an assignment, perhaps the assignment itself is in need of change. So, my college course, it used to be you had to design a new company's infrastructure and they had to write a business plan and all those different things. That's not what they do anymore because that didn't make sense. AI could just spit it out. They weren't learning from that. Instead, they have to actually go on the cloud and make it, or they have to record a video showing me or talking to me about it. And that's how I innovatively change. But I mean, I've been all over the place now. I've been talking too much here, but you good luck to your editor. There's a lot to do here. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thing, right? Data privacy is real and it's my data, not your data. The old Wentworth commercials, it's my money and I want it now. It's my data and I want it back.
It's more important now than ever, right?
You're not getting it back. That is sorry. It's the right phrase is it's my data and I want it regulated.
Hmm.
Right? And think about being a parent to a teenager. You tell them to clear the table, they don't clear the table. Eventually you're like, listen, if you don't clear the table, then I'm not a good teenager parent. I'm learning how to be a teenager parent. Example would be too extreme, right? But there's this point where when you child people, parent people, there's a rubber meets the road moment, and if not, there's consequences, and the rubber has to meet the road. They have to be standing out. They have to be standing outside Canvas's door in Cottonwood Heights, knocking on the door and saying, "We know you're in there. We can see you. Answer our questions, or we're done." You know,
And, you said it midway through, and I think part of the problem is the too big to fail, sometimes too, right? Like, because that's a lot of what's happened here because you end up without a lot of options, right? Like, even they're too big that you don't can't go necessarily to a competitor, or they have too much of your data at one point, and maybe there's bigger problems around, regulation around things like that that make them maybe easier to govern or easier to get out of because really you're locked in at a certain point. But that's the conversation for another podcast, I'm sure. And I'm sure we will definitely be having you back in the future because this has been a great conversation about probably what I think is one of the probably the most important topic of our time right now, just of how AI is changing the value of data and how it can be used for us, but really against us too in a lot of ways. So thank you for being here, David. If people want to get in touch with you, then is LinkedIn it? Is it not it? How do they find you? And if someone wants to hire you for a session, like where do they go? Do they find you on LinkedIn?
um,
You don't tell the hackers.
LinkedIn is probably the place. Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the place. If I had one wrapping up sentence or idea that I think I really want people to understand is everybody agrees that hackers are bad and they want me to protect their data from hackers. What I really need people to begin to understand is the hackers are the low hanging fruit. It's the companies that you do business with every day that are the bigger threat. And I need your help to hold companies accountable to stop it. Yes, I need your help and your tax dollars to fight Russia and North Korea and Iran trying to hack our data. But I need to stop the legal sale of our data even more than the illegal transactions on our data.
And I think that starts with people understanding exactly what you've told them, like why the pieces of data you don't think matter, and how when you collect them together and draw those lines, why they're valuable and why we need to be having these conversations. So thanks for being here, David. Sorry Brett couldn't be here, but I think he'll definitely be here on our next one, and we look forward to having you back in future conversations. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.